The envelope was thicker than a normal bill. Too heavy. Too serious. The kind of mail you stand over the trash can to open, just in case it's bad news and you don't want it to touch your kitchen counter. My name was typed in bold black letters across the front, with the HOA logo stamped in red beside it. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest before I even tore it open. $70,000. That number didn't make sense at first. I read it again and again. Violation fines. Accumulated penalties. Immediate payment required. My hands started to shake. I was standing in my living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, still trying to make this new place feel like home. Outside, kids were riding bikes in the neat little cul-de-sac. Sprinklers were clicking on and off in perfect, mechanical rhythm. Everything looked calm, normal, but my world had just cracked open. I had only moved into this quiet neighborhood a few months earlier, chasing what everyone wants. A peaceful life, predictable neighbors, a place that finally felt stable. I kept to myself, trimmed the lawn, followed the rules posted on the community board near the entrance gate. At least I thought I did. The letter claimed I had violated multiple HOA regulations tied to unauthorized use and modification of shared access property. Lawyer language designed to sound bigger than it was. Or maybe to scare me into paying without asking questions. $70,000 isn't a warning. It's a threat. I drove straight to the HOA office. The building sat at the edge of the neighborhood like a courthouse. Beige walls, tinted windows, a flag fluttering out front. Inside, 3 board members waited behind a long table stacked with folders. None of them smiled. None of them seemed interested in hearing my side. They spoke in rehearsed lines about community compliance, penalties, and standard procedure. I kept asking the same thing. What exactly did I do wrong? They told me I'd obstructed access pathways, restricted road use, failed to comply with directives. The words barely made sense, but the numbers did. $70,000 still sat burned into my mind. I walked out of that office feeling small, like a regular guy up against a system built to crush you quietly. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the entrance road leading back into the neighborhood. The same smooth strip of asphalt everyone used to get home. The same road I'd driven on every single day since moving in. And that's when something clicked. Because there was a detail in my property paperwork I had almost forgotten. Something I'd brushed past during closing because it sounded boring and technical. A section about land access easements and ownership boundaries. A thought crept in slowly, a dangerous little whisper that made my pulse jump. What if the HOA didn't actually own this road? What if this road, the only way in and out of the entire neighborhood, was mine? I pulled out my phone, opened the old documents, and started scrolling. Heart pounding harder with every page, until I reached a highlighted clause that stopped my breath mid-exhale. And that's where everything changed, or was about to. I lowered my phone slowly, the glowing screen reflecting off the windshield as traffic rolled past me toward the neighborhood gate. Cars didn't hesitate. They never did. They passed over that narrow stretch of asphalt like it belonged to everyone, like it had always been public. But the words I just read sat in my chest like a stone. Deeded private access roadway, sole ownership assigned to, and then my name. I remembered the day I bought the house. I'd been exhausted from paperwork, signatures blurring together while the realtor hurried me along, promising everything was standard. The road clause had been explained as an old boundary quirk from when the land was first divided decades ago. Nothing you'll ever need to worry about, she'd laughed. I had trusted her. I only cared about the house itself. The front porch where I imagined drinking coffee in the mornings. The quiet street that felt safe. Now I wondered how many people really knew the truth about that road. Growing up, I watched my parents struggle against unfair contracts and legal gray areas. They taught me to read everything carefully, but that week of closing had worn me down. I told myself I'd review the details later. Later never came. Until now, the HOA meeting replayed in my mind. How the board members avoided eye contact when I questioned the violation claims. The way one woman tapped her pen nervously as I asked about the exact boundaries of the alleged shared access property. None of them had shown me a map. None of them had produced real proof. Just numbers. Just threats. What unsettled me most wasn't the $70,000 fine itself. It was how confidently they said I owed it. Like the case was already closed. That night, sleep didn't come. I sat at my dining table, spreading documents across the wood surface like puzzle pieces. Property surveys, zoning maps, easement language filled with terms I barely understood. Outside, headlights slipped by every few seconds as cars used their normal road. My road, without knowing any of this, was unfolding just feet away, and the fear crept in. If I actually owned it, why was the HOA acting like I didn't? Were they mistaken? Or worse, did they know and hoped I didn't? The possibility that they were attempting to bully me into paying something I might not legally owe made my stomach twist. I was just one homeowner up against a coordinated organization with lawyers and authority. Who would anyone believe if this turned into a legal fight? The following day, I returned to the HOA office asking for documentation. This time, I noticed subtle changes. The receptionist stalled. The board chair suddenly was unavailable. Emails went unanswered. Calls were returned with vague promises of review. That certainty they'd shown yesterday had softened, not disappeared, just shifted into avoidance, which somehow made it worse, because silence can mean preparation. I drove the entrance road again later that evening, studying every inch of pavement in the fading light, the faded white lines, the cracks filled with tar, the tiny reflector posts along the curves. I imagined barriers going up, legal notices, news trucks, neighbor disputes, a community divided over something none of them had even realized was privately owned land. Would they turn on me if they found out? Or if the truth came out, would the HOA try to rewrite it first? I parked at the curb and stared at the neighborhood skyline glowing softly at dusk. Rows of cozy homes resting beyond a road that might not belong to anyone but me. And standing there alone, I realized the real danger might not be the fine. It might be what happens next, now that the secret can't stay buried. The first neighbor to say something was Mr. Calder from across the street. He found me near the mailbox the next morning, squinting suspiciously like he'd been rehearsing the conversation all night. "You okay?" he asked, leaning on his cane. "Heard you were up at the HOA office yesterday." The words landed heavier than they should have. I hadn't told anyone. That meant the board already had. I forced a small smile and brushed it off, but the unease followed me the rest of the day. Whispers moved faster than facts in this neighborhood. I noticed curtains parting more often as I pulled into my driveway, conversations lowering when I passed on the sidewalk. Whatever story the HOA was circulating, unpaid fines, noncompliance, that new guy causing trouble, was already shaping people's opinions, and I hadn't even told them the truth yet. At home, another subplot unfolded quietly. My younger sister, Maya, was staying with me while finishing her remote degree. She had watched me sink deeper into paperwork over the past days, the stress lines on my face growing sharper. "You're carrying this alone," she said gently one night while setting 2 mugs of tea on the table. "That HOA fight, it's already eating you up." I wanted to explain the road clause, the ownership question, but the words felt dangerous once spoken aloud. If I shared the truth too early, it could spread. And if the HOA caught wind of how uncertain I was, it could be used against me. So I said nothing. Meanwhile, pressure mounted from the HOA. Another email arrived, formal, colder than the last, warning about deadlines and possible legal escalation. No proof included. No maps. Just threats dressed as procedures. I scheduled a consultation with a local property attorney. The wait list was nearly 2 weeks. In that time, rumors began to morph. A neighbor stopped greeting me. Parents subtly redirected their kids when they saw me on the sidewalk. Someone posted anonymously in the community forum hinting that certain owners were risking everyone's property values due to selfish legal disputes. I read the comments late one night, heart sinking as the pile-on grew. They didn't know the full story, but I could already feel the turning tide. Public perception before facts had any chance to catch up. The moral tension gnawed at me, if I did own the only access road, asserting that right could disrupt hundreds of people's lives, families, kids, elderly residents, people who'd done nothing to deserve getting caught in the middle of an HOA legal fight. Was protecting myself worth the potential fallout for everyone else? Yet paying $70,000 for something I might not have felt like surrender. One evening while organizing documents yet again, I noticed something new. A survey map marked with revisions I hadn't paid attention to the first time. The boundary lines showed signs of alteration, dated years after the original plat had been filed. Why would the borders be changed? Who made those revisions? And did the HOA have copies I'd never seen? That same night, a car slowed noticeably while passing my house. The driver didn't stop, just lingered longer than necessary before rolling on down the road. It left me unsettled, paranoid maybe, but the sense of being watched never shook off. Maya noticed. "You think they're pushing harder than they should?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer, because deep down it no longer felt like random bureaucratic tension. It felt like opposing forces were quietly assembling. The HOA moving pieces behind closed doors, the neighbors choosing sides without knowing the rules of the game, while I stood alone, holding information that could change everything, or make everything far worse before it ever got better. Sleep stopped coming altogether after that. Every creak of the house sounded like someone stepping closer to trouble. Every car outside made me peek through the blinds. The road glowed under streetlights, calm, innocent-looking, but now it felt like a fuse waiting to be lit. 2 days passed. Then another HOA notice arrived. Not an email this time, a certified letter. Asterisk, final demand prior to legal action. Asterisk, no evidence included. No diagrams. Just another date circled in red, a deadline growing teeth. I drove straight to the attorney's office again, hoping for a cancellation opening. Nothing. The receptionist barely glanced up before shaking her head. 2 more weeks. 2 weeks felt impossible. On the way home, I replayed every minute of the first HOA meeting in my mind. The formal tone, the rehearsed explanations, the way the chairwoman avoided specifics when I pressed for boundary proof. I had been the only one asking questions. No witnesses, no recordings, just memory. At home, Maya confronted me gently. "They're painting you as the bad guy online," she said, turning her phone toward me. The community forum glowed with posts speculating about lawsuits, property declines, and one homeowner holding the neighborhood hostage. My name wasn't written, but everyone knew. My throat tightened. "They don't know the truth," Maya continued. "And neither do I admitted. I sat at the table, flipping through maps again. The revised survey lines nagged at me. The originals were clean. The newer copies showed shifted measurements, minor, but meaningful. Just enough to reclassify the road's ownership status. But who had ordered that change? And when? The timing didn't sit right. I made a call to the county recorder's office. They confirmed the revisions had been filed 7 years ago by an HOA legal representative. I felt cold. Why would the HOA revise property boundary maps if the road wasn't disputed? A knock hit the front door. 3 short taps. I froze. Maya's eyes met mine. The knocking came again, firmer this time. I opened the door to find 2 HOA board members standing on the porch. Their smiles stretched thin and strained. The chairwoman held a folder. "We thought it'd be better to meet face to face," she said. They stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. We sat. Silence swallowed the room. Finally, I asked, "Why did your attorney revise the road surveys?" The chairwoman's eyelids flickered. "That's a technical matter," she replied quickly. "Technical or intentional?" I pressed. The air tightened. One board member cleared his throat. Their composure began to crack. She slid the folder toward me. Inside were documents, their valuation estimates, community impact assessments, and a bold legal phrase printed across the top, asterisk risk containment strategy. Asterisk. I looked up slowly. "You knew the road ownership was unclear," I said. She didn't answer. Maya shifted beside me, anxious. The chairwoman leaned forward, voice lowering. "We just want to resolve this quietly. Nobody benefits from dragging this out. The message behind the politeness was clear. Stop digging. I stood. Give me your actual boundary proof. Her jaw tightened. That won't be necessary. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A new email alert lit the screen. From HOA Legal Counsel. Subject: Immediate enforcement action initiated. I didn't open it yet. I didn't need to, because the truth was close now, close enough to frighten them, and that meant the next move wouldn't be paperwork. It would be confrontation. And judging by the looks on their faces, they were not planning to play fair. The board members left without another word, their polite masks slipping as the door closed behind them. The house felt colder after they were gone, like the walls themselves had heard something they weren't supposed to. I opened the email at last. Asterisk injunction filed. Temporary access control approved. Asterisk. The words didn't fully register until I scrolled. The HOA had requested an emergency court order to place temporary management controls on the entrance road, cones, signage, even security, while the ownership dispute was under review. They weren't waiting for a ruling. They were moving now. My phone rang before I could finish reading. The caller ID made my stomach drop. Asterisk Maya. From downstairs. Asterisk. I just heard something outside, she whispered. I rushed to the front window. 2 trucks were slowing near the entrance. One bore a private security logo. The other carried orange traffic cones stacked high. Headlights swept across the pavement. Across my pavement. They were actually doing it. I grabbed my keys and ran outside, heart hammering. Maya followed close behind. By the time we reached the edge of the road, uniformed men were unloading equipment under the glow of portable lights. Who authorized this? I demanded. A supervisor stepped forward, clipboard in hand. HOA enforcement order, he said calmly. We're instructed to restrict traffic access temporarily. I pulled out my phone, opened the deed clause, shoved the screen toward him. This road isn't theirs. He barely glanced at it. Take it up with the court. Cars began backing up as residents encountered the cones. Confusion spread. Anger followed. Neighbors stepped out of their homes, gathering near the block. Whispers turned to arguments. What was supposed to stay quiet wasn't, and that's when the second twist hit. Across the crowd, I saw Mr. Calder, the neighbor who'd spoken to me days earlier, on the phone, pacing nervously. When our eyes met, he stiffened. Later, Maya tugged my sleeve. He used to sit on the HOA board, she whispered. I checked old postings. He resigned 2 years ago. The realization slammed into me. He hadn't just overheard about the meeting. He leaked it. And suddenly the whispers, the early rumors, the perfectly shaped narrative painting me as the villain, they made sense. Someone inside the neighborhood had been steering opinion from the start. Security personnel called for an officer presence as traffic congestion worsened. Blue lights soon reflected against parked cars. Residents' voices rose, demanding explanations that none of the officials seemed ready to give. I stood there in the middle of it all, feeling the weight of the crossroads. Expose the ownership publicly now and risk total chaos, or stay quiet longer while the HOA tightened controls that might never loosen. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. A soft voice spoke quickly, nerves bleeding through each word. You don't know me, but I worked for the surveying firm that handled those boundary revisions. My breath caught. There are documents you were never shown, the voice continued. Proof the original maps were altered under pressure from HOA legal counsel. My heart pounded. Can you prove that? I asked. A pause. Yes. Then why are you calling me now? Because they found out I still had copies. And tomorrow everything will be sealed. The call dropped. I stared at my phone as the chaos around me grew louder. Horns blaring, neighbors shouting, security radios crackling. Tomorrow. The truth had a deadline. And this time, silence might cost me everything. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cones blocking the road, neighbors arguing in the street, the blinking blue reflections of police lights against the houses that were supposed to feel like home. The anonymous caller's words echoed in my head. Tomorrow everything will be sealed. At sunrise, I drove across town to meet them. A small coffee shop parking lot. Quiet, neutral ground. My heart pounded as I waited, half expecting no one to show up. Then a woman stepped out of a faded sedan and walked toward me, clutching a worn folder against her chest. She didn't sit. "They're already pushing to suppress everything," she said. "My name has to stay off the record." She slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of original surveys and internal emails between the surveying firm and HOA legal counsel. The paper trail was clear. The boundaries had been redrawn under instruction once the HOA discovered the ownership loophole. The intent wasn't to gain control of the road. It was to erase the problem. Erase me. I contacted my attorney within minutes. The emergency consultation turned into an emergency filing. By noon, we had submitted the injunction challenge with evidence attached. Not just the deed clause proving I owned the road, but documented proof that the HOA had knowingly altered maps to fine a homeowner into compliance. By afternoon, I stood in a packed courthouse hallway as residents whispered behind me. The HOA board arrived in tight formation, faces stiff with confidence. That confidence didn't last long. Inside the courtroom, the judge reviewed the files in silence. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, he leaned forward. "The revised plats were filed under misrepresentation," he said. My breath hitched. "The road is legally the property of the named owner. Ownership confirmed." The cones were ordered removed immediately. The HOA's enforcement authority over the road was suspended pending investigation. And just like that, the central threat collapsed. Outside the courthouse, neighbors surrounded me. Confusion replaced judgment. Some apologized for assuming the worst. Others just stared, trying to reconcile how the quiet guy down the street suddenly owned the road they all depended on. But the biggest twist came later that evening. My attorney called. "You might want to sit down." The county registrar had opened a deeper title review as part of the ruling, and uncovered something older than anyone expected. The road didn't just transfer to me through a standard deed clause decades ago. It became privately owned due to a clerical inheritance oversight. The original landowner had willed future road rights not to the HOA development company, but to a distant family successor whose estate defaulted into foreclosure. That foreclosure transfer landed directly onto the parcel I purchased. Pure accident. No one, including the HOA, realized the road was permanently private land until I bought the house. Which meant the HOA hadn't discovered some old loophole and tried to exploit it. They had unknowingly stumbled into a decades-old ownership trap they never saw coming. They weren't erasing me. They were covering up their own mistake. A mistake that could invalidate years of HOA authority over access regulations. The risk containment strategy wasn't about silencing me. It was about preventing exposure. That night I drove slowly down the road, my road, watching neighbors wave as cars moved freely again. The tension had lifted, but the realization lingered. I hadn't set out to own the only road into a neighborhood. But when power tried to crush a normal homeowner into silence, it accidentally awakened something much larger. And the truth had found its way to the surface all the same. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I still saw the same image. Cones choking off the road, neighbors arguing in the dark, police lights flickering across houses that were supposed to be peaceful. And the voice from the phone call kept echoing in my head. "Tomorrow everything will be sealed." At sunrise, I drove across town for the meeting. A quiet coffee shop off the highway. Neutral territory. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I waited in the parking lot, half convinced no one would show up and I'd be left clinging to a rumor. Then I saw her. A woman stepped out of an old sedan, gripping a thick folder like a flotation device. She didn't sit when we met at the table outside. "They're trying to bury this," she said quickly. "My job's already gone. But the truth shouldn't disappear with it." She slid the folder forward. Inside were original survey maps, untouched, clearly marking the road as part of my parcel, alongside later revised versions with red lines carefully shifted just enough to reclassify ownership. Email chains followed. HOA attorneys demanding updated interpretations. Survey executives warning about legality. Final replies cutting the discussion short. It was all there. Proof. The betrayal wasn't just bureaucratic. It was deliberate. I called my attorney on the spot. Within hours, emergency filings were submitted, attaching every document. By midday, we were standing in court seeking an injunction reversal. The hallway was packed. Neighbors whispered when they recognized me. The HOA board arrived together, stiff smiles locked in place. The confidence they carried into that courtroom was built on a foundation of assumption, and that was about to crumble. The judge reviewed the documents slowly. Silence stretched. Then came the words I'd barely dared to hope for. The revised survey filings appear to be misrepresented. He looked directly toward the HOA attorneys. The original deed stands. My chest burned as I exhaled. The access roadway is legally owned by the plaintiff. All enforcement actions taken by the HOA regarding this road are ordered to cease immediately. The cones were to be removed. The security contract was voided. The fine nullified. Outside, the neighborhood's mood shifted almost instantly. Confusion replaced judgment. Neighbors apologized. Some simply stared at me like I'd become someone else overnight. But the story didn't end there. That evening, my attorney called with something no one had seen coming. Your ownership wasn't intentional, he said. It was an inheritance clerical anomaly. Decades earlier, the road's rights had been mistakenly transferred during an estate foreclosure and bundled into the property I bought by accident. The HOA never knew. Their attorneys never knew. No secret power play. No master scheme. Just a massive mistake layered over years of unchecked authority. The HOA hadn't discovered a loophole. They had stumbled into one they didn't understand and tried to force their way out of it. They weren't protecting control. They were covering up confusion. That knowledge hit harder than anything else. All this conflict, the threats, rumors, pressure, born from ignorance and fear, not malice alone. That night I drove the road slowly, windows down, watching headlights pass freely again. Neighbors waved. Life seemed normal, almost peaceful. I never wanted to own the only road into a neighborhood. But I learned something that week. Power doesn't always come from intent. Sometimes it comes by accident. What matters is what you do when you're the only one standing between truth and pressure. Asterisk asterisk. And in that moment, rolling forward on a stretch of asphalt I never asked to own, I knew I hadn't backed down when it counted most. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood started to feel like a neighborhood again. The cones never returned. The security trucks disappeared. The HOA went quiet. No more threatening letters. No more vague emails full of legal buzzwords. An investigation was opened into the altered survey filings, and the board chair quietly resigned for personal reasons. No announcement. No apology. Just an empty seat where all that confidence used to sit. Neighbors slowly came back around. Mr. Calder stopped me one morning by the mailbox. His shoulders looked heavier than the last time we spoke. I should have talked to you instead of letting rumors guide me, he said. I nodded. There was nothing left to argue about. Fear had turned people against each other faster than truth ever could. I understood that now. Maya moved out a few days later to her new job across the state. Before she left, we stood on the porch watching traffic glide along the entrance road. Ordinary cars driven by people who had no idea how close their routines came to disruption. You didn't just fight for yourself, she said quietly. You protected everyone. I wasn't sure I believed that at first, but over time it settled in. Owning the road didn't mean controlling people's lives. I established a simple permanent easement guaranteeing open neighborhood access, legally recorded so no HOA could ever threaten closures again. The power wasn't the ownership itself. It was using it responsibly. The fine was officially erased. The HOA charges dissolved entirely. No debt. No legal shadow hanging over my head. And me? I went back to being what I always was. A guy who wanted peace, not conflict. Mornings on my porch with coffee returned. Evening walks through the neighborhood felt lighter without suspicious glances or whispered conversations trailing behind me. But something had changed. I paid closer attention now to contracts, to fine print, and to how easily assumptions harden into judgment. I learned how quietly authority can grow unchecked, and how quickly it can be challenged when truth finally surfaces. The biggest lesson wasn't about owning a road. It was about knowing your rights and having the courage to ask uncomfortable questions, even when the room wants you silent. Most people never imagine they'll be standing alone against an organization like an HOA. They assume rules are rules and fines are facts. I thought that too, until reality forced me to look closer. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: never accept a verdict before seeing the evidence. And never assume you're powerless just because the other side speaks louder. ***. Sometimes the strongest position you can take is simply standing your ground. I didn't set out to become the guy who owned the only road into town. I just refused to let fear decide my outcome. And if sharing this story helps even one person read their documents, question unfair claims, or stand up when they're cornered by authority, then every stressful moment was worth it. Because truth doesn't need volume. It only needs someone brave enough to speak it. So if this story moved you or opened your eyes, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button, share this video with anyone dealing with unfair HOA issues, and subscribe for more real stories about everyday people holding their ground. And remember, sometimes the road to justice is the one you never knew you owned, until you chose to walk it.